So just the repetition of a mantra is mostly working with the space and the wind elements. So if we're doing a mantra for 1 million repetitions, then those 1 million repetitions are mostly, again, going to be purifying space and wind. But then there's also fire, water, and earth that need to be purified. So for the fire element, there is a practice called homa, which is a simple version of a fire sacrifice, where there is a fire that you would build following, safety protocols and guidelines and whatnot, and, following all of the laws of your area regarding building fires, where then after the fire is built in a particular manner using, consecrated wood, potentially, people sometimes get really intricate and detailed with homa, or it could be very simple as well, but sometimes people use consecrated wood and set out the wood in the form of a yantra of the deity that they want to worship. And then once the fire has been lit, they will call the deity into the fire. They'll ask the deity to be present in the fire, and then they'll have offerings that they'll make into the fire. Oftentimes it's ghee, which is clarified butter basically, and there'll be a wooden spoon. So I'll take my wooden spoon and scoop up some ghee and hold it over the fire, and then the ghee will begin to drop. Little droplets of ghee will begin to fall into the fire, and each droplet of ghee will be accompanied by one repetition of the mantra of the deity that I'm working with. And so if we're doing a mantra sadhana for a particular deity, then 1/10 of the total number of mantra repetitions for the space and wind elements is the number of repetitions that we'll be doing for the fire element. So, for example, let's say we're not doing 1 million repetitions, but we're doing a much more approachable, achievable sadhana of 100,000 repetitions. And then if we're doing 100,000 repetitions of a particular mantra, then we would do 10,000 oblations of ghee into the sacred fire with the mantra in order to purify the fire element. And then in order to purify the water element, there's a ritual called tarpana, which is where basically there's water, there's a vessel of water, and it could be consecrated with mantras and things like that. And then the water is poured into the hand like a little bit at a time, and then the mantra is repeated and the water is poured out either onto the ground or onto a statue of the deity or something like that. And that is done over and over again. Pour a little bit, repeat the mantra, pour it out as an offering of water and mantra to the deity to purify the water element. And this is 1/10 of the number that you would do for purifying the fire element. So again, if we're doing 100,000 repetitions, that would be 10,000 repetitions of offerings into the fire, and that would be 1,000 water offerings. Now, 1/10 of that number is done as marjana, which is a ritual where then that water, that consecrated water that has been offered to the deity, is then sprinkled over the body in a particular manner while you're repeating the mantra. And you would sprinkle yourself. If you're doing 100,000 repetitions, that's 10,000 offerings into the fire, 1,000 water offerings, and then 100 sprinkles of water with the mantra over your body, over all the different parts of your body. And then when all of this has been completed, you've done 100,000 repetitions, and done the fire offerings and done the water offerings and then sprinkled your body, and you've done all of that, then the final offering to the deity is usually a donation, and oftentimes it's a donation that is aimed at feeding people, and oftentimes it's feeding children. So for example, if you were doing a sadhana to worship a goddess, then you might feed little girls, and that would be 1/10 of the number of offerings for the earth element. So if we're doing 100,000 mantra repetitions, again, that's 10,000 fire offerings, 1,000 water offerings, 100 earth offerings, and then you would feed 10 people, potentially 10 little girls if you're doing a sadhana for the goddess. And if you are doing this particular sadhana while you're going through this process, usually it takes weeks or months in order to go through a sadhana like this, because it's really difficult to do 100,000 repetitions in a day. So for example, if I was doing 36 malas, if I was doing, 3,600 repetitions basically every single day, that would take me 28 days, a lunar month, in order to get to 100,000 repetitions. And as we're going through this process, or if you choose to go through this process, then there are other guidelines, there are certain rules or observances which will further empower and enhance the practice and ensure that the amount of time and effort that you have to put into a practice in order to achieve union with the deity is minimized. So those guidelines are that you do it at the same time every day. So you're doing the same practice at the same time. So let's say you do it at 7 a.m. every morning, and then you can have a window of 5 minutes before or after when you start. Like you can start at 6:55 or you can start at 7:05, but any more than 5 minutes before or after, then you do not count the repetitions from that day in the total that you're working up to. But even if you do miss the specified time, you should still do the same practice in order to keep the continuation up, even though you're not going to be counting the repetitions that day. Now, the other guidelines are that you're sitting in the same place, facing the same direction, that you are doing a practice called puja, which is ritual worship, and you make the same offerings to the deity every day. So if you're offering, let's say, milk to the deity, then every single day you have to make sure that you're offering milk. And if for whatever reason you can't get the same offerings, then again, don't count that day in your total number of repetitions. So another guideline to follow while doing this kind of practice is to observe sexual continence throughout the entire course of the sadhana. So if you're doing a month-long sadhana, then that would mean that if you're a male, you would avoid ejaculating for the entire month-long period. And if you're female, then you would just take your menstrual cycle. When you're menstruating, you would just take that time off of the sadhana and then return to it. I mean, you might do a different practice while you're menstruating and then return to the mantra sadhana when you're done. Now, the last guideline for this form of mantra sadhana is to do the same number of repetitions at least every day. So, for example, if we're doing 36 malas or 3,600 repetitions of mantra every day, then we want to do at least that number. It's not like you can do 36 malas one day and then do 10 the next and still count it. If you do less than that number, then you should not count that whatever you do in your total count. You should just count that day as a 0, but still do as much as you can. And you can do more than the number that you set if you want to, but only count if you're doing 36 rounds, 36 malas, then only count the 36 malas even if you do 40. Just pick a number of repetitions to do a day, figure out how many days you need to do it in order to complete, let's say, 100,000 repetitions, or how many repetitions you're going to do, and then stick to that number every single day. Now, I mentioned this practice puja, which is ritual worship, and the second practice video for this section will be going into a simple form of puja. And there are a lot of different kinds of ritual worship, but in the form of puja that we'll be doing, basically it involves consecrating an external image of a deity with the life force of the deity. And there are very elaborate rituals in order to do this in Hindu temples or whatnot. I'll just be showing you a very, very simple way to consecrate a statue. And it is not necessary to consecrate a statue every single time you perform puja, especially if you're doing it on a regular basis. However, it is necessary to understand that the image is just a placeholder for a universal principle. And through this process of consecrating the image, we begin to infuse the image with the life force of the deity. When this practice is done in its more complex forms, it can have really powerful effects where the image becomes like a lightning rod for this divine power, basically. But in the practice that we'll be doing, it will consecrate the statue, but it is not a full pranapratishtha, full infusion of the life force of the deity. Now, after an image has been consecrated, then puja proper can be performed with the image. In the form of puja that we'll be doing, it involves first meditating on the mantra and then consecrating the body as a yantra. And I'll be walking you through this. And then once the mantra and yantra have been used, you identify with the deity in order to, you visualize yourself as the deity. Imagine that you are the deity and visualize making these symbolic offerings to yourself as the deity. And these symbolic offerings are associated with the 5 elements. And then once this internal process of identifying with the deity is complete, then we turn our awareness outward and begin to unify this internal principle of divinity with our perception of external reality, so that there's not a dualism between inside and outside so much. So there's an internal phase of the process that then leads into the external phase, where there's this external image that is like a mirror of ourselves, basically. It's like an image of the divine essence within ourselves. And then, like we made the symbolic offerings to the deity within ourselves, we're making literal physical offerings to this consecrated image. And it is said that the deity can feed on the offerings with their sense of smell and with their sense of sight. So the offerings that we are going to be making to the deity are just placed on the altar and give with the mantra in order to offer that to the deity, and left there for a bit. And then after the ritual is over, after the deity has been satisfied, the candle can be blown out, the incense can be blown out, and then there is going to be some food and some kind of beverage. And when the ritual is all over and the deity has been satisfied, then the leftover food and drink are considered sacred. They've been consecrated by the vibratory power of the deity. So it's like blessed food. It's called prasad, and that can be eaten or offered to the earth or distributed to people's friends. And in big temples, a lot of times they'll offer a lot of food to a deity in puja ritual, and then they'll feed the entire congregation. And in that way, it is like connecting an entire group of people with this divine principle. And I will look forward to seeing you in the practice videos. Om.